Welcome to Talking Heads, a project of the Africa Centre based in Cape Town. Each week we bring you the experts, mavericks and the thought leaders who are demanding we think differently about who and what it means to be African.
Over the years, several people have echoed the idea that a society can be measured by how it treats those members often marginalized. The poor, the disabled, children, women, the uneducated, the elderly, and also those who have, for whatever reason, justly or unjustly, had their freedom of movement seized from them. Prisoners. Depending on where you look, some prisoners spend years incarcerated and emerge with university degrees. Others come out with more street cred and gang codes. Some prisoners are raped in prison, contract illness and die. Some prisoners become even more hardened while in prison. Some get killed in gang violence. And still there must be others who simply do their time and return home. In South Africa, considering such things as the prevalence of political prisoners, unjust laws, and Robben Island, what do prisons represent in a post-apartheid state? Did the new South Africa also get new prisons? Are South Africa's prisons apolitical spaces? Or are the same tussles and transformations that must occur in the free spaces of South Africa post the apartheid regime occurring in her prisons as well? South Africa has the world's 7th highest number of prisoners, outranking countries with up to nearly 5 times its population. In Africa, South Africa has the highest rate of imprisonment. What, if anything, do these facts and statistics have to do with South Africa's unique history?
Our policy is one which is called by an Afrikaans word apartheid.
And in lieu of being able to make society better and better, how do we address these obvious problems? Dr. Kelly Gillespie is a senior lecturer in the Department of Anthropology at the University of the Witwatersrand. She has a PhD in anthropology from the University of Chicago, where her research revolved around prisons and incarceration in post-apartheid South Africa. In 2010, she won the Friedel Seltop Award for Outstanding Young Researcher, and she's also the co-founder of the Johannesburg Workshop in Theory and Criticism. In 2012, she was nominated by the Mail and Guardian, one of 200 South Africans under 35 making a difference. I am Yewande Omotoso, and today I'm talking with Kelly Gillespie about her work on prisons. Kelly, thank you for being with us and welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Yewande. It's lovely to be with you.
Your dissertation is entitled Criminal Abstractions and the Post-Apartheid Prison. Could you describe this research for us, particularly in, layperson's language?
Sure. I went to the University of Chicago to do a postgraduate degree in anthropology, and I went with a very specific question. The question was asked out of a very specific context. I started going to university in 1995 in South Africa. So it was 1 year after the first democratic elections, and the question that was really preoccupying everybody in the university as well as outside at that point was, how does one transform fundamentally South Africa and the South African society so that it no longer resembles the apartheid system that was produced from colonial era, but most particularly from 1948. And one of the striking problems, issues that was facing South Africa in the mid to late 1990s was the emergence of a very dramatic escalation in crime. It perplexed people because how could crime accompany freedom? And what was the relationship between criminality and democracy? And what I was really interested in, and the question that I took with me into my PhD research was, how is it that a society that is busy creating democracy very actively and very self-consciously, how does that kind of society respond to criminality and the rise in crime? And what I was very concerned about was the fact that seemingly the South African state, as well as ordinary South Africans, seem to be responding to crime with a very simple reaction of punishment. So instead of thinking about what are the conditions of crime, why is crime a really significant sign in the wake of apartheid, what is the meaning of crime in terms of what it says about the democratic experiment after apartheid, instead of asking those kinds of questions and thinking about what they demand of us to transform the social, the state as well as society was responding with a very punitive, reactive agenda to crime. So there was the desire to build more prisons, there was the desire to put more police on the streets, there was the desire to incarcerate more people, there was the desire to, and the implementation of minimum sentencing, which increased the years that people spent in prison for crime. And so we saw, instead of the diminishing of the very violent apartheid prison project, we saw the amplification of that project. And in the wake of apartheid, we saw a 60% increase in prison population. And this contradiction, if you like, between the rise in prison population and the rise in discourse and project of democracy seemed to me a really important thing to try and think about, not only because it seemed like such a strange contradiction, but also because it, to me, said something about the nature of the kind of democracy we were producing in South Africa.
So this that you're talking about has really continued. We're 20 years into the democracy and the prisons are overflowing. Crime is this, it's this huge monster looming over the society. What is it then that we didn't address when we began the democracy? What do you think the real problem is?
After 12 years of studying crime and punishment in South Africa, I'm now pretty convinced of two things. The first is that crime is probably one of the most important signals that we are not living in a democratic society. It signals the continued presence of deep inequality. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that prisons are not a solution to the problem of crime. And one of the most powerful things that came out of the research that I've been doing is that it is almost impossible to make a prison into a democratic place. That it is almost impossible, no matter how much progressive architecture you throw at it, no matter how much human rights training you do with prison warders, no matter how much policy you write to try and transform prisons away from being repressive, corrupt, violent institutions towards something else, it's almost impossible to do that under almost any conditions. And so for me, what's come out of the research is the fact that if we really want to fix the problem of crime, we have to really address the much deeper conditions around why crime itself is emerging as an important symptom of post-apartheid society. And that, for me, is about continued inequality, the inability of the South African state, for a variety of reasons, to address seriously the poverty, inequality, racism that the apartheid and colonial projects laid down. And unless we can do that, we're not going to solve the problem of crime. And unless we can do that, we're not going to ameliorate the conditions under which the prison becomes an easy solution to a problem that's actually much more complex and much deeper. So a lot of the critical research, for example, that's coming out of the United States, which is the biggest incarcerator in the world, which totally dismisses, two of the things that really dismiss the United States' claim to democracy are, of course, the wars that they're perpetuating all around the world, but also the fact that they have massive incarceration projects going on internal to the United States that basically lock up minority communities of color and the poor.
Considering firstly, how much research, thought, and skill, I guess, is behind people like yourself or someone like Angela Davis or people who are looking at this issue, who's listening? I mean, are there examples of governments and institutions that are listening to the kind of information and data you're providing?
It's very difficult to make this argument in a context like South Africa. I think in the United States, because they're really powerful activists who have a huge moral credibility, very strong political histories that people really respect, and they're getting behind what's called the prison abolition or the decarceration movement in the United States.
Well, the struggle to overhaul the criminal justice system in the United States has reached a pivotal moment. There is a growing momentum toward rethinking the system.
There's the beginnings of a real movement in the U.S. to understand the problems with using the criminal justice system to fix the problem of crime. In South Africa, we live in a very punitive society. We live in a very violent society, and it's very difficult for people to shift away from a punitive response at all levels towards something that is more about a deeper critique of the way in which society functions.
What I find really exciting is, let's say, someone like Angela Davis, so activists who are working, educators, thinkers, academics, and like I asked you earlier, the way the intellectual input that such people are creating can actually make a difference in society. You're an educator and you've chosen to focus on such issues as incarceration, criminal justice, South African history, societal violence. What are your hopes for your work? You know, as an academic, what is it you personally wish to accomplish over the course of your service?
I think it's a really, really important question. And I think it's one that many academics don't confront in all of its seriousness. The academics that I love and I respect and I take as mentors are those that consider their work within universities and in the field of research to be intimately connected to critical questions about how to transform societies to serve all who live in them. Academics move between, elite political space and elite university space, and we sometimes get stuck more in the project of how to fix things than how to think things in interesting, new and provocative ways. We really stay focused on how it is that we use a global critical scholarship to think our societies in more rigorous, more innovative ways. That's really what I take as my responsibility as a young African scholar.
Kelly, thank you very much for speaking with us.
It's a great pleasure. Lovely to speak to you, Yewande.
To find out more about Kelly Gillespie's work and to listen to other podcasts, visit www.talkingheads.org.za.